The afternoon of my son's christening reception, I still had the petals from the flower crown my mother had braided into my hair that morning. The baby was sleeping in her arms when I left him with her to go check the hall, and when I came back, my mother wasn't in the garden or the entrance hallway. I found her, alone, next to a side table, pushed against the back wall, right where the tablecloth ended and the noise from the kitchen began, with my son still held tight against her chest, and her eyes fixed on the main door, as if she were waiting for someone to arrive and tell her it had all been a mistake. Inside, there were 180 people eating. My mother was against the wall with my son because someone had decided that was her place. Before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you why I took the microphone from the hands of the master of ceremonies in front of all those people, I need you to know where I come from. But first, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, this is a good time to do it. And tell me in the comments what part of the US or the world you're listening from. We love reading them. My name is Rachel Miller. I'm 38 years old. I'm the head nurse at County General in Philadelphia. I was born in South Philly, in a cramped row house with a concrete backyard and a single shared water line for the whole block. My dad, Arthur, worked as a waiter for 42 years, not in a hotel restaurant and not in one of those places with a French menu and a sommelier. He worked in the neighborhood diners, the VFW halls, the local catering gigs where they paid him by the event, and where he learned to balance 10 plates on each arm without spilling a single drop. He'd get up at 5 in the morning and come home when there was nothing left to do but heat up the meatloaf my mom had left on the stove. My mom, Helen, ran a breakfast cart near the Navy Yard for 28 years. Not a permanent brick and mortar with a neon sign, but a steel cart with a flat-top grill, a propane tank she struggled to lift, and a green canvas awning she patched up 5 times because she refused to spend money on a new one, as long as she had thread and willpower. She'd get to the yard at 6 in the morning, come back at 2 in the afternoon, and by 5, she was already ironing my brother's clothes or checking the youngest's homework with a patience I've never been able to replicate. Between the two of them, they pulled me through. Between the catering money and the breakfast cart money, they paid for my nursing degree at Penn State. They bought my books, my white nursing shoes, the scrubs, the stethoscope they gave me when I graduated, the one I still use, the exact one I take to the hospital every single day. The day I got my degree, my dad showed up in his plaid shirt and the slacks he saved for important occasions, and he stood in the photo with a smile so wide you could count his teeth. My mom brought foil-wrapped breakfast sandwiches for my classmates, a whole cooler full of them, and to every single girl who took one, she'd say it with the exact same certainty she used when stating the prices at her cart. My daughter is the head nurse. I wasn't yet. It took me 8 more years to get there, but she already knew. I grew up with the smell of griddled eggs and black pepper baked into my clothes. In middle school, I was ashamed of it. At 38, that smell is the closest thing I have to a definition of home. I met Alex at the hospital. He's an internist, 3 years older than me, serious, educated, the kind of guy who holds the door and says thank you to the cab driver. The kind of man who seems good because he knows how to be polite in public. And at 34, after 2 relationships that didn't work out, that seemed like enough to trust him. His family is mainline Philadelphia through and through. His dad was a corporate attorney, and his mom, Eleanor Sterling, belonged to that category of women who organize the church programs, chair the private school galas, and know exactly how much a square foot of real estate cost in every zip code of the city. When I met her for the first time at her colonial estate in Bryn Mawr, she greeted me with a brief hug and a smile that never reached her eyes, and she asked me where I had gone to school. When I told her Penn State, she nodded her head, that specific nod people do when they register information without evaluating it, like when someone tells you the price of something they have no intention of buying. Alex always told me that was just how his mom was with everybody, but I shouldn't take it personally, that I should give her time. I gave her time. I gave her 3.5 years. In that time, Eleanor learned my name, but she never knew what part of South Philly I was born in. When I mentioned once that my mom ran a food cart near the Navy Yard, she told me she didn't get down to that area very often. She said it without visible malice, with the neutral tone of someone who doesn't need to explain her preferences because she's never had to justify them to anyone. When Evan, our son, was born, I thought things were going to change. I thought a baby erases the distances adults build between each other. I wanted to believe that. Evan was 3 months old when we started organizing his christening reception, and from day one it was crystal clear that Eleanor had a very different idea of what that event should be. She picked the venue, a country club out on the main line with an indoor garden, arrangements of white calla lilies, and a 3-course menu. 200 people on the guest list. Half of them were acquaintances of the Sterling family partners from Alex's father's law firm, ladies from the charity board Eleanor donated to every December, members from the club they went to on weekends. My parents put in money. Not a little either. My dad had saved whatever he could from his pension for 2 years. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. My mom sold a small plot of land she'd been holding on to since her brother died, a tiny patch in South Jersey that was worth just enough to cover the difference. Between the two of them, they scraped together enough to cover 20% of the total cost. That 20% was every dime they had saved. My dad told me one afternoon in his kitchen, while putting hot sauce on his eggs, that he wasn't going to let his first grandson's christening happen without doing his part. He said it without drama, without emotion in his voice. Just the way he said everything that truly mattered to him, as if it were a fact and not an opinion. The only thing I insisted on was the seating chart. I sat down with the event coordinator, a highly efficient woman named Lauren, and we agreed on the layout. The head table for Alex and me, both sets of grandparents and the godparents. I signed that floor plan. I took a picture of it with my phone. Lauren emailed it to me with the subject line, "Final layout confirmed, Miller Sterling christening." I saved that email without really knowing why. Something inside me, something that didn't have a name yet, told me I was going to need it. The day of Evan's christening, I woke up at 6 in the morning in my apartment in Center City. My mom had come over the night before to help me. She had ironed the baby's little outfit. She had done my hair with braids and small flowers she bought at the local market. And by 7, she had breakfast ready: scrambled eggs, toast, and freshly squeezed orange juice. My dad arrived at 8 in his gray suit, the only one he owned, the one he used for anything important. He told me the second he walked in. "Got it pressed yesterday, kiddo, so we wouldn't be rushing." We got to the country club at 10 in the morning, 2 hours before it started. At the hospital, I always check the charts before the shift begins. In my personal life, I do the exact same thing. The hall was exactly what Eleanor had asked for. Pristine white calla lilies everywhere, chairs tied with organza bows. Flawless, designed for a magazine spread. I pulled up the floor plan on my phone and started walking the tables. The head table, the names on the place cards didn't match what I had approved. Alex and I were there, yes, but in the seats where my parents were supposed to be, there were 2 names I didn't recognize. Arthur Sterling, Alex's paternal uncle, and his wife. I called for Lauren. She appeared with her tablet and that professional smile of someone who knows she's carrying bad news, but gets paid to deliver it calmly. She told me Eleanor had contacted her 4 days ago to request a reorganization of the floor plan, that the older woman had assured her I was fully aware. I wasn't aware of anything. I asked her to show me the new complete layout. She turned the tablet toward me with the delicate hesitation of someone handing you a biopsy result she knows you don't want to read. I saw it all. The Sterling family filled the first 3 tables. The law partners and the charity board ladies took up the center, and at the very back of the hall, at a round table set for 8, pushed right up against the service archway with a direct view of the swinging doors the waiters used to bring out the hot trays, were my parents' names. Table 13. The absolute last one. I didn't move for a moment. Lauren didn't say a word. I think she understood perfectly well what I was looking at. I asked her if Eleanor had given any reason for the change. Lauren chose every syllable with surgical care. She told me the lady had mentioned that older folks always appreciated being in a quieter spot, away from the hustle and bustle of the main table, that it was too much noise for people of a certain age, and that this way they could tend to the baby better without the distractions of the VIP guests up front. People of a certain age. My dad is 64. My mom is 61. They both walk on their own, think on their own, decide on their own, and have spent their entire lives waking up before dawn without anyone telling them how to organize themselves. I thanked Lauren quietly. I put my phone away. I walked toward the wing where the bridal suites were. I went looking for Alex. I found him in the VIP lounge, the venue reserved for the hosts. A space with gray velvet armchairs and a wet bar stocked with sparkling water and coffee. He was with his brother, adjusting his tie in front of the mirror. When he saw me walk in, he smiled. One of those smiles he wore when he was in a good mood. I asked him to speak with me alone. His brother stepped out without asking questions. I told him everything calmly. The altered layout, my parents' names at table 13, the call Eleanor had made to Lauren claiming I was on board. I delivered the whole thing without pausing, looking him dead in the eye, because I needed to catch his reaction before he had time to script it. And I saw it. A slow blink, a microscopic shift in his jaw. Not surprise. The look of a guy who knew the topic was coming and was annoyed it had surfaced sooner than he planned. He told me his mom had mentioned something to him last week that, at the time, it didn't seem like a big deal, that today was a very special day, and he didn't want any tension. He said my parents were going to be fine at any table, that they weren't the type of people to care about those kinds of things. I stood there processing that sentence. Alex had eaten dinner at my parents' house dozens of times. My mom made him chili when he came off a long shift because she knew it was his favorite. My dad told him stories about the catering gigs he'd worked and the veteran waiters he knew, the tricks he'd learned to make people feel perfectly taken care of. Alex would laugh. He'd say Arthur was an incredible character, that Helen cooked better than anyone. And now he was telling me they weren't the type of people to care. I asked him how long he'd known about the change. He ran a hand through his hair. He told me his mom had brought it up on Tuesday. It was Saturday. 4 days where he had called me every single night to coordinate the final details of our son's christening. 4 days where he couldn't find a single second to tell me my parents had been exiled to the back of the room. I told him I needed the original floor plan restored immediately, that my parents were sitting at the head table, exactly as we had agreed. Alex took a slow breath, sat on the arm of the velvet chair, and looked at me with an expression I knew all too well. The one he wore when he thought I was being hysterical. He told me he understood why I was upset, that it was valid, but moving the tables now, 2 hours before the guests arrived, was going to cause a massive fight with his mom that just wasn't worth it. He said after the reception we'd sit down, we'd set clear boundaries, he'd explain to his mom how things were going to be. After the reception. Always after. I had heard variations of that exact phrase for 3.5 years. After the holidays. After this busy season at work. After she gets to know you better. After. Always after. And meanwhile, in the present reality, my parents were assigned to a table by the kitchen doors. I didn't answer him. I turned around and walked out of the room. I walked down the side corridor, the one that was half lit and smelled like industrial bleach and fresh-cut flowers. I stepped out into the back garden where there were cast iron benches no one was using yet, and I sat alone in front of a fountain they hadn't turned on, just a dry stone circle with dead leaves at the bottom. I thought about calling my mom to give her a heads up, but I didn't want to worry her. She had shown up at my apartment the night before with a bag of fresh bagels for breakfast, and another bag holding the emerald green dress she had bought specifically for today. She had texted me a picture of it 3 weeks earlier, asking, "Is this okay for Evan's christening, or do I look like an old lady?" She didn't look like an old lady. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had spent 28 years standing over a hot grill before dawn, and who, on this day, wanted to look exactly as beautiful as she deserved. My friend Trish found me in the garden. We knew each other from our residency days at the hospital. She had studied social work and handled domestic cases at a clinic in North Philly. She was the calmest person I knew, the kind who listens without interrupting, without inflating the drama, without minimizing the pain. She sat next to me without saying a word. I told her everything, right up to the end. When I finished, she stayed quiet for 5 seconds and asked me what I wanted to do. I told her I didn't know yet. She nodded. She told me she was going to be wherever I needed her to be. Then she asked if I wanted water. I said yes. She left and came back with a cold glass she got from the kitchen staff. I drank it right there alone in the garden, wearing my formal dress, with the May sun starting to beat down hard. At 11:45, I heard movement inside. The first guests were arriving. The background music kicked in. The waiters started circulating with trays of hors d'oeuvres. The machine was turning on. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. "Honey, we're here. Your dad was driving around looking for parking. Where are you?" I told her to meet me at the main entrance. I stood up, smoothed out my dress, checked my makeup in the phone camera, and walked toward the lobby. I saw them before they saw me. My dad was walking up the garden path in his gray suit, the one he'd pressed the night before. It was a little tight across the shoulders because he'd put on a few pounds since the last time he wore it. But he looked sharp. He had trimmed his mustache that very week. He walked with the straight spine of a man who has carried heavy trays his whole life and knows that good posture isn't something you can fake. He was taking in the venue with that quiet curiosity of someone who enjoys new places without ever feeling the need to belong to them. My mom was walking beside him in her green dress and the silver earrings I had bought her last year. She held Evan tight against her chest, wrapped in the crocheted blanket she had made by hand during my pregnancy. In the spare moments between the grill and the neighborhood errands, Evan was sleeping with that deep, heavy peace of a baby who still doesn't know how complicated the world can be. They spotted me. My dad stopped and gave me that smile of his, slow, like he needed a second to let the joy settle into his features before showing it. My mom called out from where she stood, telling me I looked gorgeous, that the dress fit me perfectly. I guided them inside. The foyer was already packed. On Alex's side of the family, I recognized his brothers-in-law, Eleanor's friends from the charity board. Eleanor was holding court in the center of the lobby in a navy blue gown, a glass of white wine in her hand, surrounded by women who listened to her with the rapt attention of people who know it pays to listen to the hostess. She saw the three of us walk in. Her gaze tracked from me to my mom, from my mom to my dad. It lingered for a fraction of a second on his shoes on her green dress, and snapped back to me with the exact same smile she had been wearing before she saw us. a smile that didn't shift by a single millimeter. She walked over, gave my mom an air kiss on the cheek, and told her she looked lovely. She shook my dad's hand with the sterile politeness of someone fulfilling a diplomatic protocol without committing to a damn thing. She put her hand on my arm and told me the hall looked absolutely breathtaking. My parents went into the main room to find their table. I stayed in the lobby, knowing exactly what they were about to find. 20 minutes later, I went looking for them. They weren't at table 13. I found them in the service corridor, that narrow hallway between the ballroom and the kitchens. My mom was standing up, rocking Evan in her arms. My dad was leaning against the wall, hands in his pockets, looking down the corridor with the stoic calm of a man who has waited in kitchen hallways his entire life and knows that walls don't judge. They had found table 13. They had seen the 2 chairs jammed against the wall right next to the swinging doors. They had heard the crash of dishes on the other side. They had felt the waiters rushing past with scalding trays less than 3 feet away. And my dad, who had spent 42 years walking in and out of kitchens exactly like that one, had taken my mom by the arm and guided her out into the hallway so she'd be more comfortable. That's how he explained it to me when I walked up. He said there was too much commotion inside, that they were much more relaxed out here. My mom smiled when she saw me. She told me Evan had gone back to sleep, that he was just like me when I was little, that I never woke up from loud noises either. Neither of them complained. Neither of them said a word about the floor plan or the names on the cards or the waiters brushing past them. My dad just asked if I had eaten anything yet. I stood there looking at them, and I finally understood something I had been desperately avoiding for 3 years. To Alex's family, my parents weren't Evan's grandparents. They were a PR problem. 2 names that didn't fit the aesthetic of the VIP photos. A retired waiter and a lady from a food cart, who didn't mesh with the law partners and the charity board ladies. And Alex had known this since Tuesday, and he had kept calling me every night, pretending everything was fine. I told them I was going to take care of something. I told them not to move. My dad looked at me for a second with that specific gaze parents get when they read exactly what their daughter is about to do right on her face. He didn't ask a single question. He just said, "Go on." I went to find Trish. She was in the garden on the exact same bench. She stood up the second she saw my face. I told her my parents were standing in the service hallway. Trish didn't ask any questions. She stood perfectly still for 3 seconds and told me to think very carefully about what I wanted to do. I was already thinking, but I needed to hear one more thing, something that would help me finally drop the weight I was still carrying. I walked back toward the hallway leading to the VIP lounge. The door was cracked open. Before I even reached it, I heard voices. The first was Eleanor's. Crisp, clear, never needing to raise her volume because she had spent her life in rooms where everyone automatically made space for her. She was talking to Alex. She was telling him that everything looked perfect, that rearranging the tables was the right call, that she couldn't understand why I had made such a fuss over something so trivial. She said the bride's parents were good people, charming even, but that an event of this caliber required a certain consistency in the image of the head table, that his father's partners and the charity ladies were accustomed to a certain environment, that a man who had been a waiter his whole life and a woman who sold sandwiches out of a street cart, no matter how nice they were, simply didn't set the right tone for a head table at a Sterling family event. I heard Alex reply. His voice was calm. No objections. He said yes, she was right. That deep down, it was just common sense. That my parents were simple people and wouldn't even notice things like that. That I always let my emotions dictate my reactions instead of looking at situations with a cool head. Simple people. Common sense. emotions instead of a cool head. I leaned against the hallway wall. My hands weren't shaking. What I felt was exactly what I feel when I review a patient's chart and spot the one anomaly that changes the entire diagnosis. A cold, absolute clarity. Zero drama. Like when the math suddenly adds up and you can never look at the equation the same way again. I realized this wasn't about a table. This was a preview of everything that was coming. The first Christmas. Evan's first birthday. The first family reunion where my parents would be slotted into whatever corner Eleanor deemed appropriate for them. And Alex was going to stand there, watching, telling me it was common sense and that they wouldn't even notice. I didn't walk back to the garden. I walked straight to the service corridor. My parents were still there. My mom was humming something soft to Evan, a song I recognized, the one she used to sing to me when I was little and couldn't sleep. My dad was listening to her, arms crossed, wearing an expression I don't see on him very often. That face he makes when something moves him deeply, but he locks it down tight inside so it doesn't spill over. When they saw me coming, my mom looked up and smiled. I told her I needed her to hand Evan to me, that I was going to do something and I'd be back for them in a few minutes. My dad looked at me closely. 38 years is more than enough time for a father to read the incoming storm on his daughter's face. He didn't ask me anything. He just told me in a low, firm voice the exact same thing he used to tell me when I was a little girl and had to do something terrifying. Say it right, kiddo. I took Evan from my mom, careful not to wake him. I held him tight against my chest. My mom squeezed my arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Trish was waiting for me at the entrance to the hallway. I handed Evan to her. She took him without a word and stayed right there with my parents. I walked into the ballroom. It was packed. 180 people seated. Clinking glasses, overlapping conversations, the background jazz blending with the scrape of silverware. The head table was dead center, brightly lit. The Sterlings occupying every seat with that effortless comfort of people who have spent their lives walking straight to the front of the line. Eleanor was in the center chair, wine glass in hand, leaning toward the woman next to her in a conversation she clearly found vital. Table 13, way in the back, had 2 empty chairs and 2 untouched glasses of water. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, the blast of heat and the clatter of pots washed right over those 2 chairs, a constant reminder of exactly where they belonged, according to someone who had never once in her life had to wake up at 6 in the morning to fire up a grill. The master of ceremonies, a guy with a booming radio voice Eleanor had hired, was standing in the middle of the dance floor with a microphone, welcoming the guests. He saw me approaching and extended the mic with a theatrical flourish, probably expecting a few words of gratitude from the mother of the guest of honor. I took the microphone. He stepped aside with a polished smile. 180 people looked at me. I took one breath. Not out of nerves. My dad taught me not with words, but with 42 years of carrying overloaded trays without spilling a drop, that when you have to do something heavy, your core has to be perfectly still. I said that, before the reception began, I needed to share something with everyone in the room. I said that this morning, I had discovered that the seating chart I had personally designed and approved weeks ago had been altered without my knowledge or consent. That my parents, Arthur and Helen Miller, Evan's maternal grandparents, had been relocated from the head table to the very last table in the room, right next to the kitchen doors. I said that this change had been ordered by Alex's mother 4 days ago, after she lied to the coordinator and said I was fine with it. That I was absolutely not fine with it. That when I confronted Alex about it, he told me it was common sense. He said my parents were, and I quoted his exact words, simple people who don't care about things like that. The silence that followed had gravity to it. It wasn't a movie silence. It was the crushing real-world silence of 180 people simultaneously processing something they never saw coming. Head snapped toward me, then toward the head table, then toward the back of the room. 180 pairs of eyes found table 13, the 2 empty chairs, the untouched water glasses, and the kitchen doors, which swung open at that exact second as a waiter pushed through with a tray, letting the chaotic crash of pots and pans flood the silent ballroom for 3 agonizingly long seconds. I watched the reactions ripple across the faces on my side of the room. My college friends, my nurses from the hospital, my cousins. First, sheer confusion, and then something that looked a hell of a lot like rage. My cousin Lauren slowly shook her head. A night shift nurse covered her mouth with her hand. At the head table, the air had been sucked out of the room. Eleanor sat frozen, her wine glass hovering halfway to her lips. Her eyes locked on me with an expression I had never seen on her face. It wasn't anger. It was the look of someone who is being truly seen for the very first time and realizes in real time that she has completely lost control of the narrative. Alex was standing next to his chair. His jaw was clenched shut, his eyes drilling into me. I didn't see an ounce of regret. I saw calculus. I saw a man rapidly evaluating his options, frantically searching for the exact right phrase to mitigate the PR disaster. The exact same look he gave me when he told me to just give his mother time. I kept going. I said that my parents had paid for a significant portion of this event, that my father had saved whatever he could from his pension for 2 solid years just to be present in his grandson's life from day one, that my mother had sold the only piece of property she owned, a plot she'd kept since her brother died, that between the 2 of them, they had emptied their accounts without asking anyone for a damn thing, because that's exactly who they are, and that someone in this room had decided that their sacrifice earned them a seat next to the kitchen doors, exactly where my father had spent 42 years of his life, working to serve other people. I paused. I said I had swallowed a lot of things over the last 3.5 years, because I was told that's how families are built, with patience, with compromise, with giving things time. But there was a line you do not cross, and that line was the dignity of the people who bled to give me everything I am. I said my parents were going to sit in the seats they rightfully earned, or there wasn't going to be a damn thing to celebrate this afternoon. I put the mic back on the stand. The MC was standing 6 feet away, his arms hanging limp at his sides, his mouth slightly open like he had forgotten he possessed a physical body. I didn't look at him. I stepped off the dance floor. My heels cracked against the hardwood, with that sharp echo that only exists in a room of total, suffocating silence. Every step was a clean, definitive sound, like the tick of a clock, locking in a reality that could never be undone. I walked through the tables. One of my nurses squeezed my arm as I passed without saying a word. My cousin Lauren stood up and hugged me fast and hard. I went straight for the service hallway. Trish was there with Evan and my parents. My dad's eyes were red. Not from crying, but from that brutal containment men use when they were raised never to break in front of anyone. My mom had her hand over her mouth. They had heard every single word through the ceiling speakers in the corridor. My dad stepped up to me. He put both hands on my shoulders and looked at me for a span of time I couldn't possibly measure in seconds. Then, he pulled me in and hugged me hard with both arms the exact way a 64-year-old father hugs you when his hands smell like starched cotton and morning coffee. And in that embrace was everything he has never needed to say out loud. Because he's not a man of words. He's a man of absolute presence. He took one deep breath. Then he let me go, adjusted his suit jacket, and said in a perfectly steady voice, "Let's go." My mom hugged me. Then she cupped the back of my neck, just like she did when I was a little girl, running a fever, and she stayed up all night with me. She leaned into my ear and whispered, "I'm starving, honey. Let's take the baby and go get something good to eat." I laughed. I actually laughed standing in the service hallway of a mainline country club, wearing a formal gown with my makeup still flawless because Trish used setting spray meant to survive a 12-hour trauma shift. I laughed because my mom was hungry, and that was the most honest, real, profoundly her thing she could have possibly said in that moment. Trish went and grabbed my purse and her car keys without me asking. I don't even know when she slipped away to get them. Best friends know what you need before the thought even forms in your head. The four of us walked toward the exit. My parents in front, with Evan between them, Trish and I right behind. Behind us, I heard Alex's voice calling my name. "Rachel! Rachel, wait!" I didn't stop. Not because I was blindingly angry, but because there was absolutely nothing left to wait for. Everything I ever needed to hear from him, I had already heard, through a cracked door and a calm voice agreeing with his mother. Right behind him, I heard Eleanor's voice, still not yelling, using that tight, clipped tone of a woman rapidly losing control of a chessboard she thought she owned, saying I was being hysterical, that this could be fixed, that we just needed to talk it out. Talk it out. As if shoving my parents to the back of the room by the garbage doors was a clerical error in an Excel spreadsheet and not a glaring billboard broadcasting exactly what she thought they were worth. I didn't look back. Trish unlocked the car. My dad got in the back on the right, my mom on the left with Evan in her arms. I took the passenger seat. Trish fired up the engine and turned down Broad Street, heading straight for South Philly. It was 12:40 p.m. on a Saturday in May, and the Philadelphia sun was beating down hard. That bright, piercing light the city gets when the air is dry and the summer humidity hasn't hit yet. From the back seat, my mom said, "You know what sounds amazing right now? A patty melt from Broad Street Diner." My dad chimed in with grilled onions and extra fries. Trish just said, "I know exactly how to get there." And she merged onto the avenue heading south, like that had been the master plan all along. We pulled up to the diner at 1:15. It was one of those old-school joints with faded vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and the neon sign buzzing in the window. The kind of place that's been sitting on the same corner for 40 years because they make damn good food and don't need to change a thing to keep people coming back. The guy behind the register watched us walk in. He looked at my mom in her emerald dress, my dad in his sharp gray suit, Evan waking up in my mom's arms, and me in a cocktail gown. He didn't ask a single question. In South Philly, people know when to pour the coffee and mind their own business. We slid into a corner booth right by the window. We ordered patty melts, a mountain of fries, milkshakes, and a black coffee for my dad, who hadn't touched a milkshake since he was 50. My mom bounced Evan on her knee, and he just stared up at the spinning ceiling fan with that wide-eyed awe of a baby discovering the world is bigger than his bedroom. We ate in silence for the first few minutes. Not the suffocating silence of things you're afraid to say, the heavy, comfortable silence of things that have already been said loud and clear and never need to be repeated. My dad ate slow, watching the traffic roll by on Broad Street with the quiet peace of a man who has watched the city move from behind a tray for decades. A man who knows that everything shifts, everything changes, and the only thing you actually take with you is who you decide to be. My mom spoke first. She said the patty melts were just as good as she remembered. Then, without shifting her tone, as if she were still talking about the melted cheese, she said, "I knew it since that very first dinner at their house, honey. From the second Eleanor asked me exactly what corner I parked my food cart on. I knew it by the way she asked it. But I didn't say a word to you. I didn't want to put ideas in your head. You looked so happy, and I was willing to swallow whatever I had to, as long as you were happy. Swallow whatever I had to." My mother had been fully prepared to sit at table 13, right next to the swinging kitchen doors, and eat her meal without uttering a single complaint, just so she wouldn't ruin my day. That hit me harder than anything that had happened inside that country club. Because my mother had spent 28 years standing over a greasy flat top in the freezing dawn, specifically so I would never have to swallow anything from anyone. I didn't say anything profound. I just reached across the Formica table and took her hand. She squeezed it once tight and went right back to eating her sandwich. That was enough. It's been 14 months. Alex and I ended it that exact same week. It wasn't a drawn-out negotiation. It was a very clear conversation. I told him that what I heard through that cracked door wasn't a bad day or a lapse in judgment. It was the fundamental operating system of how he and his family viewed the world. And that's not something you fix by having a little chat with Mom after the party. It hasn't been easy. We have a son together, which means we still have touch points, drop-off times, custody schedules to stick to. We stick to them, with courtesy and with the exact amount of distance required. Evan is 15 months old now. He's walking, grabbing onto the furniture, obsessed with the sound of jingling keys, and he cracks up every time my dad makes faces at him. Every single Sunday, we go to my parents' row house for dinner. My mom cooks whatever she's in the mood for. Sometimes it's a massive pot of chili, sometimes a roast, sometimes the jambalaya she learned to make after a trip we took to New Orleans 10 years ago. My dad puts on his old records, Motown or classic rock, depending on his mood. And Evan sits at the table with us, in a wooden high chair my dad sanded and stained himself, so there wouldn't be any sharp edges. I'm not telling you this to say that everyone's choices have to look exactly like mine. Everyone has their own timeline, their own reasons, their own survival tactics. Some people can stay and fight from the inside, and there's honor in that. Some people need more time to finally realize what they can no longer stomach. That's not weakness. That's a process. I am not anyone's judge. I have enough on my plate with my own life. I'm telling you this because I know there are people out there currently sitting at a table 13 somewhere in their lives. In a relationship where you're constantly told you're overreacting. In an in-law dynamic where they look at your family with that freezing, polite tolerance of someone who adores you but will never respect you. In a job where they shrink you down. In a system that demands you be endlessly grateful for the scrap of space they assigned you, even if that space is right next to the garbage chute. If that's where you are right now, I need you to know one thing. You don't need a ballroom with 180 people staring at you. You don't need a microphone. You don't need a best friend with a getaway car or a corner booth at a diner waiting for you. You just need to know, with a clarity so sharp it feels physical in your chest, that the people who bled to make you who you are belong at the head of the table. And you do too. Dignity is not a VIP pass handed out based on your last name, your tax bracket, or the zip code you were born in. My father, in his one gray suit saved for important occasions, holds more sheer dignity in his hands than anyone who needs to shove an old man to the back of a room just to feel powerful. My mother, in her green dress eating a patty melt in South Philly, commands more absolute presence than any woman who needs to weaponize a guest list just to feel like she's in control. That's not a theory. That is a fact. And it's exactly what 180 people witnessed that Saturday in May. My name is Rachel Miller. I am 38 years old. I'm a head nurse. I am Arthur and Helen's daughter. I am Evan's mother. Every Sunday, I eat at a scarred wooden table in the house where I grew up, listening to the music my dad plays, eating the food my mom cooks, watching them fight over who gets to hold their grandson. And I promise you, that table is worth a hell of a lot more than any head table at any country club on the main line. If this story hit something inside you, drop a like on the video and tell me down in the comments what part of the US or the world you're listening from. And if you want to hear more stories like this before anyone else, hit that join button and become a channel member. I'll see you in the next one.